So welcome, brothers, to our session that I and my close friend and colleague Lauren, we're going to be offering on climate adaptation. Uh, we're going to do a really brief introduction and set the context because what we really want to do is leave the most amount of time for us and especially Lauren to walk through uh, some deep work that actually we've been working on in terms of climate adaptation. So I am Steve Hicken. I'm your chair-elect of Illumin, and I'll invite Lauren to introduce herself.
Hi, it's great to be with you all. As Steve said, my name is Lauren. I am an interfaith minister, and the work that I do in the world I call eco-chaplaincy.
Great. So a couple of things about this session. One is it's important to know that the assumption or the premise for this session is that the climate crisis is upon us. It's not something in the future. It's not something that one day might happen. It's happening right now, and it's going to continue to happen. We have fires in Australia 6 months ago or so, and fires and smoke in California, the smoke all over the country. We have record-breaking hurricanes. They number hurricanes by letters, and we have more letters this calendar year than any other year that we've had before. We have an inland hurricane called derecho, which hardly hit the news, but if you're a farmer in Idaho, it's been devastating. There's flooding, you name it, it's here. So we just wanted to, that's our starting point. Our project is not about climate change mitigation. It's about adapting to what's upon us, especially for faith-based communities. And that's the work that we're developing here now. Lauren and I, we're going to present you a roadmap. It's going to be very quick. Just wanted you to be aware of the steps that individuals and communities can take, very practical steps. If we need to, we can come back, at some point in the future and develop this more with communities or chapters. Finally, this is a little bit ahead of time because Richard Rohr and Jim Taylor on Saturday evening are going to be giving a much deeper and broader talk about the climate emergency. So I'll stop there and just ask Lauren. Lauren, how did you come to embrace this Project Adapt and this whole theme?
Yeah, this is great. I have spent the last 15 years doing the work of eco-chaplaincy. And last summer, I was in conversation with my brother, who is a professor, and said, hey, maybe you should read this paper by a guy I'd never heard of, Jem Bendell, who wrote a paper called Deep Adaptation. And in Jem's work, he's in the UK, he's a professor in what we might call kind of the sustainability or green business sector. Jem sort of had a lightning through the sky moment and said, you know what, it's too late. These conversations about greening your business or finding a sustainable way forward are really dated. And he proceeded in this paper to outline a way forward. But again, as Steve said, it's not about mitigation. It's about how do we work with what is? How do we really recognize what is, reconcile ourselves to it, go through a process with one another, shore up what we can, and take care of each other in the process. And reading this paper was like I could feel my shoulders relax. It was like, oh, this is what we need to be talking about. And I've found it to be very energizing in how realistic it is, that it is not overly pessimistic, any more so than all of the climate events that Steve just rattled off. That litany is all true, and it can be very overwhelming and very depressing. But I think within what Jem and others are now calling the deep adaptation path, there can be opportunity for all of us to engage and act and hopefully be moved and take care of each other in the process.
Thanks, Lauren. In a moment, I'll just ask Lauren to walk us through what we're calling the 5 Rs. Jim Bendel had 3 and then added a 4th, and we've added actually one more. Uh, and I did want to underline what Lauren said there. In my life, anyway, I've been reading. I've been reading about this for 30 years or so, and it's so giant, global that where you start. I've been actually kind of paralyzed about this. The 5 Rs actually give you very specific steps that you can take to respond. Um, and in that sense, it's very hopeful and practical and doable, tangible. Um, so Lauren, could you walk us through those 5 Rs?
Good. Let's see this with some visuals. Okay. So we begin with, I'm giving you, that was a spoiler alert right there. We begin with the R, reverence, which, as Steve mentioned, was not on the original list. But as we felt into it, and as we, Steve and I both being people who really feel both grounded and motivated by the moments of awe and wonder in our life, we realized that reverence is really the point that deep adaptation begins from, and it is also a very important place to return to anytime that things start to feel a little wobbly, which is right now sometimes, a lot. But within reverence, we would maybe liken this to sort of the soul. It's the grounding of our being. It's the everything and the no thing. And within the Illumined community, I'm sure that you have other language for reverence, but that it's integral to what you're all doing. Sometimes people might call it gratitude, that when we're really coming from a place of gratitude, we are anchored and we're more capable of entertaining new possibilities and moving forward. Is there anything else you want to add to that, Steve?
Yes, there is one. I wanted to read. This is very spontaneous here. A piece that our worldwide organizations, the organizations that were inspired by Richard's work in Czech Republic, Austria, Germany, UK, Ireland, Australia, and I hope I haven't forgotten anybody. But anyway, this is a piece that we're reflecting on together about reverence, which goes like this. We embrace a deep sense of reverence towards the mystery of our lives, our existence, and that each moment is a gift. Reverence leads to humility, respect for our sisters, our brothers, and for the more than human world. Reverence begets accountability, since we ultimately serve a higher good. Reverence empowers a man, in our case, reverence empowers a man to wholeheartedly undertake what is his to do in the world. I just wanted to read that a little bit, Lauren, because that's something that our global brothers are reflecting on right now.
That's it. That's great. And, on this slide, we give you maybe a few suggestions around how reverence moves or expresses itself for us internally in our individual vessel, and then also how it looks in the world when it's being expressed externally or more communally in a group. From reverence, we go into resilience. And resilience, you'll notice there are a lot of green arrows here. If my PowerPoint skills were a little bit more amazing, the resilience arrow would be like a serpent. It would be S-ing in and out and in and out, because resilience is really the thing that allows us to adapt. Our resilience, we're hearing this a lot in conversations about, is your community resilient? How resilient is your place of work? How resilient was the child after the accident that they experienced? So the conversations about how we respond to trauma often now are actually conversations about how resilient were we in the face of something very traumatic. And the resilience piece is really integral to deep adaptation because it's the rubber that runs through it all, but it is also what allows us to keep changing the end goal, if that makes sense. So, you know, down in external manifestation, we see some references to systems theory. It's the idea of, oh, okay, well, we thought that we needed to just be thinking about COVID and keeping everyone safe, but now we actually have these evacuation centers for the hurricane evacuees, and we can't really have them all in there because of COVID. So how do we want to adapt? That would be an example of the end goal keeps changing, and we need to be really responsive and kind of in the moment around how we're taking care of each other. Steve, do you want to say more about resilience?
Couple of things. So resilience is what we're doing right now because we would usually each fall be gathered together in Tamaya, a little north of Albuquerque, in person, enjoying the beauty of each other's company. That's not possible because of our coronavirus or COVID, and so Lumen has shifted to an online platform, and it's a little bit like sort of doing a dance. We hear the deeper mystery dance step, and we know we can't step the way we did before, but we keep on moving forward in creative ways, in resilient ways, thoughtful ways. But like what Lauren mentioned, we don't lose sight of where we want to go. And along the way, actually, resilience causes you to go deeper, deeper to recognize what really is most important, and that will probably lead us into the next hour. So I'll stop right there. And
Okay,
Lauren,
that was great.
we're doing fine on time. Yeah.
Okay. So out of resilience, we move to relinquishment. And I wonder what it's like for you when you hear that word. When I read it in Jem Bendel's paper, the theologian in me, I like got tingly. I just thought, wow, there are so many sermons in this paper. There is such a deep invitation for all of us, because relinquishment is the thing that capitalism abhors. It absolutely does not want to talk about relinquishing anything. And what is so wild about that, spiritually, we know this, that relinquishment can bring relief. When we let go of things, when we're willing to put things down and release them, new possibilities appear, simplicity arrives, things happen. But if we don't let go of it, we are really stuck in kind of the consume, greed, scarcity mentality. So relinquishment often does bring sorrow. There is grief, there is loss. Fundamentally in relinquishment, we could be talking about things like people leaving their beautiful coastside homes and moving inland. These changes are hard. It could be the 7th generation coal miner trying to figure out how to transition to a new form of work. Of course, this level of change is really disruptive to communities. And so we know that relinquishment isn't easy, but we also know that there is a lot of power in relinquishment, and that it's incredibly important in how adaptive we become. So the internal experience, as you see, absolutely can take us through the stages of grief. And I think one of the things that we're missing in our society right now is ways of publicly relinquishing. How do we take care of each other in ceremony, in acts of communal relinquishment? And maybe this is an opportunity for all of you as your own wheels are turning and you're thinking more about this. Steve, do you want to say some things about relinquishment?
Just an experience. So very personal experience that during this the coronavirus lockdown, a lot of people here, at least in the Bay Area, who used to go to malls or restaurants, found that they couldn't do that. So they went to parks and hiked and walked around, and that was beautiful, and I was one of them. Uh, and then the wildfires came, and then the smoke got so bad and the air got so bad that I went out to the park where I usually hike and, looked at my little app that tells me how dirty the air was. And it was just really actually unhealthy, for me to go walking up the hill. But I did bring like a folding chair. So I sat at the bottom of a tree, actually pretty experiencing like, damn, I was like, can't walk. I can't really be outside. I'm in this beautiful park. I can't even really see the top of the mountain that I hike up to. So I decided I would just write about that loss. Um, and I posted it to Facebook, which I've done three times ever. You know, I'm not a Facebook guy, but I did post this, and it was about the grief and the loss, and about hearing how the forests themselves were screaming, of their loss, to the tune of millions of acres in California. Uh, and I got a whole bunch of like comments back of people resonating with, oh, we've all been feeling this. Thank you for putting it into words. It was just the sharing. It was the sharing of the loss actually that empowered a solidarity or engendered a solidarity, which previously I didn't know was there. So
That what you're saying is so important, and I think it serves as a reminder every time I hear a story like yours, Steve's, that people are actually so hungry for what feels true, and we have kind of tiptoed around this topic a lot because we think that it's unsavory or people don't want to talk about it. And then when we start talking about it, the heads are nodding and people are saying yes, 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 yes. So the time is really right for deep adaptation. So the third R is restoration. And these are the places that we probably feel most familiar with, just in terms of it's that voice in us that says, well, let's do something. Let's get out there and volunteer on Earth Day, except that, of course, what we need to be doing is far more than that. We've heard some stories of what restoration could look like when we think about the Green New Deal, for example, or permaculture projects, or other regenerative agriculture. These are all acts of restoration, and it can be incredibly energizing and hopeful because it feels like we are really giving Earth what she is hungry for. And in our act of doing so, we very often feel Earth loving us back. So restoration tends to be a pretty positive R. I think the external manifestation kind of spells out a lot of what it can look like communally. You'll see there is restorative justice circles in there, which is a little bit of a foreshadow. But within restoration, we are also acknowledging what we've messed up. So we are trying to go in and do some repair work around things that have been in disrepair or needing to be reimagined and reinvented. Steve, what do you want to say about restoration?
restoration is one of those steps. I think it's very well. It's my experience to feel like whatever I do in this area, it's going to be too little and it's going to be too late, and so you kind of do nothing. I kind of do nothing until I start doing something, whatever small it is. And then the experience of doing it, physically doing it, in our case, our garden. uh, and interestingly, we went to a place where they, for a garden supply store, and it's all sold out because I guess an awful lot of people are starting gardens, which is actually really great. The people, the store proprietors were kind of astonished. In any case, once I had my hands in the dirt and I'm learning gardening, you know, uh, somehow there was just the sense of the internal experience of the healing, resting, emerging, renewing, expressing gratitude that somehow or other, well, it wasn't mine to judge whether it was enough or it was too early or too late. It was enough for me just to do it. Uh, and I can't resist. Many of you probably have heard the story of the hundredth monkey, uh, which was popular, was told an awful lot during the 1970s or so, of trying to halt the nuclear arms race. But the story basically goes, and I'm going to paraphrase it. You can hunt it. There's versions on the internet where in Japan there was a baby monkey on one island that discovered that by hitting a seed on a rock in a certain, or like a husk on a rock in a certain way, seeds would come out. And it just started doing this. And then the mother started watching the baby, and then the mother started doing it. And then the others in the band started doing it. And then on the next canyon over, those monkeys started doing it. And then all the monkeys on the island started doing it. And then some time passed, and then the monkeys on a completely separate island were also breaking the seed. So we just simply don't know what the multiplication effect and how the grace and the mystery of this works. We simply don't know. This is where we'll probably talk about radical hope a little bit later, but I couldn't resist that story. Sorry.
Yeah, that's good. That's great. So the fourth R here is reconciliation. Reconciliation was something that came later for Jem Bendel. He began with resilience and relinquishment and restoration. Reconciliation came later when he realized that there was still some question in the community or for his reading audience around sort of the how or the why, maybe. And it's quite funny to read what he's written about this, because he says, wow, this is all reaching spiritual proportions now, and I feel like I'm theologically out of my league. But he proceeds to say, reconciliation is about reconciling ourselves to our terminal diagnosis. All of us are going to die, and we don't know when, but what we have done on planet Earth is now giving us kind of greater dimension in our invitation, because how do we choose to live and die in the face of societal collapse, in the face of a climate crisis? How will we bring meaning to this? How can we love well? How can we die well? Many people have come into the deep adaptation conversation because of this reconciliation R. And we've seen, certainly since March of 2020, how reconciliation looms large in this conversation because of how the pandemic has played out across socioeconomic stratas, and in a climate justice perspective, who are the people who get hit by the climate crisis first? So there are all kinds of invitations for us to not just reconcile ourselves to our finite time on this amazing planet, but also to reconcile ourselves with one another and with the injustice in the world. So reconciliation can be as small or as cosmically large as a person wants it to be. Steve, what do you want to add to reconciliation?
Well, first of all, I want to note that the sun is coming out in front of my window and it's turning my face like completely white. I can't really fix that right now, but it'll just in case you started noticing that. On reconciliation, there's one personal experience was is Laura had mentioned, that we have a terminal diagnosis. We're going to die, and that is one of the lessons on our men's rites of passage is to really embrace that, and we ritualize that in a very deep way in that experience. So that particular piece is will be familiar to many of us. The second thing is that I mentioned that when I was writing that piece earlier on grief and loss of this smoke-filled day where I couldn't climb the mountain, it also did come to me. It's like, oh wow, well, it my end might be nearer than I thought it was, and right away it came to mind that there was a conversation with a college friend, Bob, that I needed to have, which I've managed to put off all these years. And I thought, oh well, before I depart, I need to talk with Bob. And then I thought, oh, and there's others too. Maybe I need to make a list, and then somehow sort of this very visceral experience of facing your death moves you to reconciliation, because then that leads to this relief, expansion, and peace. So this is just so much a constituent of part of these R's, the reconciliation part.
This is what the R's look like when they're in full flow. It's nearly impossible, as I'm sure you can imagine, to be in one R and not touch some of the other R's. That's the whole point. We're not living in a time where we need things to be in silos anymore. It's far messier than that, and messy can be really great. Many of us don't like messy for long periods of time. So what do we need to be doing to care for one another in the mud and the muck, taking breaks where we can, and really calling to mind the words of Robin Wall Kimmerer. Some of you have maybe read her fantastic book, Braiding Sweetgrass. I consider it to be one of my Bibles today. But she says this: action on behalf of life transforms, because the relationship between self and the world is reciprocal. It is not a question of first getting enlightened or saved and then acting. As we work to heal the earth heals us. So that's the serpentining quality that I mentioned before of the R's. Steve, you mentioned radical hope, and I didn't put any slides in this deck about that, but I'm wondering if you want to spend a few minutes talking about that too.
Yeah, what the radical hope part really has to do when we start walking on the path, this roadmap. There is a really deep sense of well, let me back up a little bit. One of my primary motivations, the deep motivation in this is, now in my middle 60s and as a grandfather of 4 grandchildren, maybe others down the way, I thought to myself, it's not possible for me to be a grandfather and not work on this climate adaptation, because for a long time I have thought of a commitment to future generations, and especially many of us have learned about and are inspired by commitments to make decisions as our indigenous people on this land did 7th generations into the forward. Well, around a year ago I started looking at the climate projections, and we can barely see into towards the end of the 2nd generation, towards the 3rd. We have no idea we really actually have no idea what kind of a world even the 3rd, 4th generation of humanity is going to live into. That's scary, but that is the truth. And so I sort of have to work on it. It's mine to do, and I'm delighted to find Laura and the others to work with you. And that's part of my invitation to all of the men of Illumin and Richard as well, that he made speak about on Saturday evening. And somehow the hope in this comes from the deep conviction that I'm not in control of the final outcome of this, but I can make a commitment, a heart commitment to live into it as I can. And as I do that, I experience sort of an affirmation. And that's kind of how I come back to the radical hope. Lauren, I don't know what your experience of that is. We've still got about 5 minutes or so, 10, actually.
Radical hope is a concept that I think can feel a little academic, but the conversations around it began with, of course, people saying hope. Isn't that kind of Pollyanna? Isn't that kind of just, you know, we say that word, but like we hope that the climate will get better, and it can feel a little overly optimistic and shallow. And so there are some anthropologists, scholars who've looked into this a bit, and radical hope is really more describing something that can happen when there is no hope. The hope becomes radical when all hope is lost. And one of the examples that Bendel uses is a chief of the Crow Nation. His name was Plenty Coups. And in an interview with an anthropologist, Plenty Coups was describing what happened when most of his tribe had been wiped out and the last buffalo had been killed, and they were, you know, being marched to a new land that was going to be the reservation, and there was no hope. And Plenty Coups described to Jonathan Lear, this anthropologist, what happened. And, you know, what happened is there were dreams and there was prayer, and there was tons of sorrow and not really knowing what was going to happen, but still waking up every day and putting one foot in front of the other and knowing that his lungs were breathing and his heart was beating. And many of us have had flavors of this, maybe not to that extreme, but radical hope is this pocket in our imagination that opens up when every door has closed. And I think that if we haven't experienced it in this lifetime, it's something that we maybe want to start entertaining. How might we call in messages of radical hope in this time, if for no other reason than to pass them on to our grandchildren, to try to record our dreams, to try to record what it was that the bird just told us or that the rock said, because these absolutely are the sacred texts of our time.
Mm-hmm. So we do have, Lauren and I actually right now are offering a 3-session series on, you know, the 5 R's to the Marin Interfaith Council. Marin is a county a little bit north of San Francisco. And so we have, you know, I can be in touch, you know, through Lumen channels. If there's any chapter community that would like a little bit more on this, we can certainly talk about that. We've developed a sort of a tangible way that each of these R's can, you can live those out individually and as a community. Of course, at the same time, we're saying this is like a massive collective pioneering exercise that, you know, these will serve as our guides, but it's something that each community and individual is going to have to live into. The one thing I did want to finish up with too, it's a story that's come to mind in my rites of passage. That was 2001. One of the instructions was, well, okay, as men we get together, and, you know, many of you may call this, you can talk about anything, but you can't talk about your profession, or you can't talk about your career, your work, because, you know, that's how as men, you know, we create a pecking order, and let's just not do that. So, you know, I noticed over the 5 days time, the quality of relationships between the men that were there partly as a result of the ritual, but partly as a result of changing the conversation, dramatically changed such that it was the storytellers that all of a sudden began to sprout. And the musicians pulled out their instruments and the singers began to sing. And, you know, there were the guys who danced around the fire at night. Our Australian brothers jumped through the fire at night. They just had a way of moving with the dust and you know, the shadows. And it was just, and it gave me goosebumps. And I remember thinking, wow, you know, this good life, a thriving life doesn't require all this crap that I was taught that I needed to have. I don't need all that stuff. It can be a very, very good, rich life once I open up, at least to, you know, these other ways of connecting. This is really hopeful because this does chart the way to a very sustainable life for humanity into the future. So did want to share that a little bit. Lauren, is there any other heartfelt
I
thing?
echo absolutely your story about the campfire and how any of us knows in moments that we've experienced life at its most simple, how fulfilling it's been. And it isn't that it isn't also great to, you know, return home to your hot shower or your, you know, favorite cup of coffee or something. I get that. I appreciate that those can be spiritual experiences in their own right. But there's something that is also so relieving, isn't there, about connecting with one another in really wholesome ways? And we can feel it, I think, right now in the noise that's around us, you know, whether it's with the election or something that's happening in your news feed where you live. And so I do think that deep adaptation has some really useful clues for all of us in how to sort of weed out some of the noise and get back into what is actually the medicine of the moment.
So thanks all for leaning into a difficult topic. It is really, if we're all really honest, this one makes everyone take a very deep breath, you know. But breath is what we're about, and we're here with each other. Lauren and I will finish up our presentation now, and hoping for ways to offer feedback, which, if that is happening, we'll have mentioned that a little bit earlier. So thank you all.
Thank you all. Have a great rest of your conference.